The blazing summer sun of 1878 cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Redemption Creek as Jessie Harlow clutched her tattered carpetbag, watching the stagecoach that had delivered her rumble away in a cloud of dust. Her crimson dress, once fine but now travel-worn, drew disapproving glances from the women who paused their shopping to stare. With nowhere to go and only a few dollars to her name, Jessie lifted her chin and headed toward the only place a woman with a past could seek employment in a town like this, the Silver Dollar Saloon. The saloon's swinging doors parted as Jessie approached, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. Yates Lawson, owner of the Double L Ranch and the most respected cattleman in the territory, stopped in his tracks as their gazes met. For a moment, neither moved as the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them amid the bustle of the frontier town. "Miss, you might want to reconsider where you're heading," Yates said, his voice low and graveled by years of calling to cattle across the open range. "The silver dollar isn't for a lady like yourself." Jessie's laugh was soft but bitter. "You don't know what kind of lady I am, sir." "No," he agreed, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "But I know trouble follows a woman walking alone into a saloon in this town." "Trouble and I are old acquaintances," Jessie replied, shifting her carpetbag to her other hand. "And I need work more than I need protection." The corner of Yates's mouth twitched. "There's honest work at my ranch. My housekeeper just left to care for her ailing mother in Denver." "The position includes room and board." Suspicion narrowed Jessie's eyes. "Why would you offer employment to a stranger?" "Because everyone deserves a fair chance," he said simply, then glanced at the gathering crowd of onlookers. "And because I've never been fond of gossip." "The stage only comes once a week, and you'll be the talk of Redemption Creek by supper time." Jessie surveyed the townspeople watching their exchange, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. She recognized that look. It was the same one that had driven her from 3 towns already. "What's your name?" Yates asked. "Jessie Harlow." He nodded once. "Yates Lawson, my wagon's at the general store. I'll be leaving in an hour if you decide to accept my offer." As he walked away, Jessie weighed her limited options. The saloon promised quick money but familiar dangers. The ranch offered respectability but placed her at the mercy of a man she didn't know. Still, something in Yates Lawson's steady gaze told her he could be trusted at least more than most men she'd encountered. An hour later, Jessie climbed onto the seat of Yates's wagon, ignoring the whispers that followed her. The journey to the Double L Ranch took nearly 2 hours, giving Jessie time to observe the man beside her. He wasn't much for conversation, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. His hands were calloused but gentle on the reins, and he nodded respectfully to every person they passed on the road. The Double L sprawled across a valley bordered by distant mountains, its white painted main house standing proud against the backdrop of a vast blue sky. A bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings completed the picture of prosperity. "It's beautiful," Jessie said softly as they approached. "Been in my family for 20 years, Yates replied. "My father worked himself to death building it. I aimed to make sure it wasn't for nothing." A tall, lanky cowboy with a shock of red hair approached as they pulled up to the house. "Boss, the cattle in the north pasture are looking peaked." "Might be that bad water we were worried about." "Thanks, Cooper. I'll ride out and check first thing tomorrow." Yates jumped down from the wagon and turned to help Jessie. "Miss Harlow, this is Elijah Cooper, my foreman. Cooper, Miss Harlow is our new housekeeper." Cooper touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, Mr. Cooper," Jessie acknowledged, aware of his curious glance. "Cooper, could you ask Mrs. Finch to come up from the cookhouse? She can show Miss Harlow around before supper." As Cooper left, Yates carried Jessie's bag onto the porch. "Your room's in the back of the house. It's small but private. Meals are served in the main house for me and in the cookhouse for the men. Mrs. Finch handles the cooking, but you'll be responsible for keeping the house in order and helping with the washing." "I can manage that," Jessie said, surveying what would be her new home. "There's one more thing." Yates turned to face her, his expression serious. "People in town will talk. They'll wonder why I brought a young woman out here." I don't care much for their opinions, but I don't want them making life difficult for you. If anyone asks, you're a friend of my late sister's from back east, that should quiet the worst of the gossip. Jessie's throat tightened at his consideration. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Yates, he corrected. If we're going to live under the same roof, we might as well use first names. An elderly woman with silver hair approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Her sharp eyes took in Jessie's travel-worn appearance without judgment. Mrs. Finch, this is Miss Jessie Harlow. She'll be taking over as housekeeper. About time, Mrs. Finch declared. Come along, dear. I'll show you what needs doing while there's still daylight. Jessie followed, casting one last glance at Yates, who stood watching them with an unreadable expression. She wondered if she'd made the right choice. But as Mrs. Finch led her through the comfortable, well-built house, Jessie allowed herself to hope that perhaps, this time, she'd found a place where her past couldn't follow. The first week at the Double L passed in a blur of cleaning, organizing, and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Jessie rose before dawn each day to build fires and prepare for breakfast. After the men headed out, she spent her days scrubbing floors, dusting furniture, and washing endless piles of laundry. By nightfall, she collapsed into her bed, muscles aching but mind peaceful for the first time in months. Yates was rarely in the house, spending his days riding the range, checking cattle, and managing his vast property. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a careful distance. Only during evening meals, when they sat across from each other at the large oak table, did Jessie catch glimpses of the man beneath the rancher's stoic exterior. My mother planted those rose bushes by the front porch, he told her one evening, noticing how she'd arranged some blooms in a jar on the table. Said a house needs something beautiful to remind a man what he's working for. She sounds like a wise woman, Jessie replied. She was. A shadow crossed his face. Died of fever when I was 16. My sister followed 3 winters later. I'm sorry, Jessie said softly. I lost my parents young too. Yates studied her, curiosity evident in his gray eyes. Where are you from originally, Miss Harlow? Jessie hesitated, setting down her fork. Missouri, a small town you wouldn't have heard of. And what brought you west? The same thing that brings most people, I suppose. A fresh start. Yates nodded, accepting her vague answer without pressing further. Well, you've earned your keep this week. Mrs. Finch says the house hasn't been this clean since my mother was alive. Warmth bloomed in Jessie's chest at the simple praise. Thank you for giving me a chance, Yates. Not many would have. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood what it meant to rebuild from loss. The moment broke when Cooper knocked on the door with news about a broken fence line, and Yates excused himself. But that night, as Jessie lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the prairie night, she found herself thinking of storm-gray eyes and wondering what it might be like to truly belong somewhere again. Saturday brought Jessie's first trip back to town. She rode beside Yates in the wagon, a list of supplies tucked in her pocket and nervousness churning in her stomach. You don't have to come if you're not ready, Yates said, noticing her tension. I can handle the shopping. No, Jessie said firmly, I can't hide forever. Besides, I need fabric for new curtains. The town looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less intimidating. Still, Jessie felt the weight of curious stares as they pulled up in front of the general store. Yates jumped down and offered his hand to help her descend, his touch sending an unexpected flutter through her. I'll see to the feed and hardware, he said. Meet you back here in an hour. Jessie nodded and stepped into Murdoch's general store, where she was immediately engulfed by the comforting sense of coffee, leather, and spices. She moved through the aisles, selecting items from her list and adding fabric for curtains and a small bit of blue ribbon her one indulgence. At the counter, Mrs. Murdoch, a plump woman with suspicious eyes, tallied her purchases. You're the woman staying out at the Lawson place. It wasn't a question, but Jessie answered anyway. Yes, I'm the housekeeper. Mrs. Murdoch's mouth puckered. Unusual for a single man to hire a young woman like yourself. I was a friend of his sister's, Jessie replied, reciting the story Yates had suggested. When he heard I needed work, he offered me the position. Funny. I never heard Martha Lawson mention any friends from back east before she passed. Mrs. Murdoch's eyes narrowed. Where did you say you were from again? I didn't, Jessie said, meeting the woman's gaze steadily. How much do I owe you? The door opened, bringing in a gust of wind and 3 women dressed in their Sunday best, despite it being Saturday. They fell silent upon seeing Jessie, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disapproval. Well, if it isn't the mysterious new arrival, said the tallest woman, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being listened to. I'm Harriet Blackwood, head of the Ladies' Aid Society. These are Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Cunningham. Jessie Harlow, Jessie replied, forcing politeness into her voice. Pleased to meet you. We were just discussing you at our meeting, Mrs. Blackwood continued. It seems unusual for a young, unmarried woman to arrive on the stage with no introductions and immediately take up residence with a bachelor, regardless of her employment status. Jessie felt heat rise in her cheeks. I don't see how my employment is anyone's concern but mine and Mr. Lawson's. Everything in Redemption Creek is our concern, Miss Harlow. This is a God-fearing community with standards to uphold. I'm sure it is, Jessie replied, gathering her purchases. If you'll excuse me. Mrs. Blackwood moved to block her path. I think you should know that we've written to the marshal in Silver Springs about your arrival. It seems prudent given your sudden appearance. Jessie's blood ran cold. Silver Springs was only 2 towns away from where she'd last been recognized, if they started asking questions there. I don't understand why that would be necessary, she managed to say. Don't you? Mrs. Blackwood's smile was sharp. A woman traveling alone, taking up with the wealthiest rancher in the county. We protect our own here, Miss Harlow. The bell above the door jangled as Yates entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. He took in the scene with a quick glance, his jaw tightening as he moved to Jessie's side. Ladies, he greeted the women with a tip of his hat. I see you've met Miss Harlow. Indeed, Mrs. Blackwood replied. We were just discussing how unusual her situation is. There's nothing unusual about hiring help, Yates said mildly, though Jessie could feel tension radiating from him. Miss Harlow comes highly recommended. By whom? Mrs. Blackwood pressed. By me, Yates replied firmly. And since I'm paying her wages, that's all the recommendation needed. He turned to Jessie. Are you ready? We should head back before the weather turns. Outside, Jessie inhaled deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. They're riding to the marshal in Silver Springs. Yates loaded her purchases into the wagon. People talk, Jessie. It doesn't mean anything. It does. She looked up at him, unable to hide her fear. Yates, there are things you don't know about me. There are things nobody knows about anybody, he replied evenly. Your past is your business. What if it becomes yours too? What if they bring trouble to your door because of me? Yates faced her then, his expression serious. I've never backed down from trouble and I don't intend to start now. He held her gaze. Whatever you're running from, you're safe at the Double L. I give you my word. Jessie wanted desperately to believe him, but experience had taught her that safety was temporary at best. Still, as they drove out of town, she found herself drawing strength from Yates's steady presence beside her and the promise of the ranch waiting in the distance. That night, Jessie sat up late in her room, sewing new curtains by lamplight and trying to quell the anxiety that had followed her from town. Mrs. Blackwood's threat lingered, a dark cloud on the horizon of the peace she'd begun to find at the Double L. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Yates holding a steaming cup. Thought you might like some tea, he said. Saw your light still burning. Thank you. She accepted the cup, inhaling the fragrant steam. I wanted to finish these curtains. May I? He asked, gesturing to the chair by her small desk. Jessie nodded, suddenly aware of her simple nightgown covered by a shawl and the intimacy of having him in her private space. She returned to her seat on the bed, cradling the warm cup. About today, Yates began, I want you to know that those women don't speak for everyone in Redemption Creek. They speak for enough, Jessie replied, and they're right to be suspicious. You don't know anything about me, yet you've brought me into your home. Yates leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I know you're a hard worker. I know you treat Mrs. Finch with respect, which tells me more about your character than any letter from Silver Springs could. And I know that look in your eyes like you're always watching the horizon for a storm. Jessie stared down at her tea. And that doesn't concern you. Everyone has storms at their back, Jessie. Some are just bigger than others. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. How long had it been since someone had looked at her and seen more than her mistakes? I was married, she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. His name was William Harlow. He was charming and handsome and promised me the world. I was 17 and foolish enough to believe him. Yates remained silent, giving her space to continue. He was a gambler. A good one until he wasn't. We moved constantly, always one step ahead of his debts. Jessie's fingers tightened around her cup. I didn't know how bad things were until men came to our hotel room in Denver. William wasn't there, he'd gone out to play cards. They said he owed money that he'd offered me as collateral. Yates's knuckles whitened where he gripped his knees, but his voice remained steady. What happened? I fought. One of them pulled a knife, I grabbed it and… Jessie closed her eyes, the memory still vivid. I stabbed him, not fatally, but enough to get away. I ran all night. The next day, I read in the newspaper that William had been shot cheating at cards. So you've been running ever since? 3 years, Jessie confirmed. Whenever someone starts asking questions, I move on. I've used different names sometimes, but Harlow is my real married name. I don't know if that man I stabbed pressed charges or if William's creditors are still looking for me, but I couldn't risk finding out. Yates was quiet for a long moment. You defended yourself against men who meant you harm. There's no shame in that. The law might see it differently, Jessie said bitterly, and so might your neighbors. Then the law and my neighbors would be wrong. Yates stood, his height seeming to fill the small room. Thank you for trusting me with the truth, Jessie. It changes nothing about your position here. Relief washed through her, even knowing I might bring trouble, especially knowing that. His smile was slight but genuine. Get some rest. Those curtains can wait till morning. After he left, Jessie lay awake for a long time, the weight of her confession leaving her both lighter and somehow more vulnerable. She hadn't told Yates everything, some wounds were still too raw to expose, but she'd told him enough to give him the choice to send her away. That he hadn't was a gift she hardly dared trust. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the first hint of autumn touching the air. Jessie hung her new curtains, the blue fabric brightening the main room and bringing a homey touch to the ranch house. She was sweeping the front porch when she spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon, a rider approaching fast. Cooper galloped up minutes later, his face grim. Miss Harlow, is the boss around? He rode out to the north pasture at dawn, Jessie replied, setting aside her broom. What's wrong? Cattle rustlers hit the Ferguson place last night, shot 2 of their hands. Cooper removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. Marshall's forming a posse. I need to find Yates. I'll tell him when he returns, Jessie promised. Be careful, Mr. Cooper. As Cooper rode away, unease settled in Jessie's stomach. Rustlers meant danger, and danger meant the law would be sniffing around, just when she'd started to feel safe. Yates returned mid-afternoon, his expression turning serious as Jessie relayed Cooper's message. Ferguson's the 3rd ranch hit this month, he said, washing trail dust from his hands. It was only a matter of time before they came this far north. Will you join the posse? I'll ride into town, see what the marshal has planned. Yates dried his hands on a towel. Cooper's a good man, but he's hot-headed. I want to make sure he doesn't do anything foolish. Be careful, Jessie said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Yates studied her face. I always am. He hesitated, then added, if I'm not back by nightfall, bolt the doors. There's a shotgun in my room. Do you know how to use one? Yes, Jessie answered, remembering lessons from her father long ago. But surely it won't come to that. Probably not, Yates agreed, but I'd feel better knowing you can protect yourself if needed. After he rode out, Jessie tried to focus on her chores, but worry gnawed at her. As afternoon stretched into evening with no sign of Yates or the men, she found herself checking the horizon repeatedly. Mrs. Finch brought supper from the cookhouse. No sense cooking just for yourself, the older woman declared. The men are likely holed up in town for the night. The marshal won't want to track rustlers in the dark. You're probably right, Jessie agreed, though her anxiety didn't lessen. After Mrs. Finch left, Jessie locked all the doors and windows. She retrieved the shotgun from Yates's room, the weight of it solid and reassuring in her hands. His room smelled of leather and pine, masculine but not untidy. A framed photograph on his dresser caught her eye. A family portrait showing a younger Yates with his parents and a pretty girl who must have been his sister. Jessie touched the frame gently, wondering what it would be like to have roots so deep, to belong somewhere so completely that your image remained even after you were gone. A noise from outside jolted her back to awareness. Shotgun ready, she moved cautiously to the window and peered out. In the moonlight, she could make out 3 riders approaching the house. Relief flooded her when she recognized Yates's broad-shouldered silhouette in the lead. She unbolted the door as they dismounted, but her welcome died on her lips when she saw the grim expressions on their faces and the 4th horse they led, draped with what could only be a body. "Cooper," she whispered, stepping onto the porch. Yates shook his head. "Tommy Davis. One of Ferguson's boys who survived the initial attack. We found him shot on the trail." His voice was tight with anger and fatigue. "We're bringing him to the house until the undertaker can come tomorrow." "I'll prepare a room," Jessie said automatically, her mind racing with the implications. A man dead, rustlers on the loose, and the law gathering. This was exactly the kind of trouble she'd been avoiding. The men carried young Davis's body to a back room Jessie had hurriedly cleared. She provided clean sheets to wrap him in and hot coffee for the exhausted men. Yates sent the others to the bunkhouse while he remained at the kitchen table, staring into his cup. "The marshal thinks the rustlers are holed up in the canyons to the west," he said finally. "We're riding out at first light with a larger posse." "It's dangerous," Jessie said, sitting across from him. "It's necessary. They've killed 3 men now. If we don't stop them, every ranch in the valley will be at risk." Yates rubbed his face, fatigue evident in every line of his body. "I don't like leaving you here alone with this happening." "I'll be fine. Mrs. Finch and I will look after each other." Jessie hesitated, then placed her hand over his. "Just come back safely." Yates turned his hand to grip hers, the calluses on his palm rough against her skin. "I plan to." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the worry and exhaustion faded from his face, replaced by something warmer. "You've made this house feel like a home again, Jessie Harlow. I'm not ready to lose that." Her heart stuttered at his words. "You won't," she promised, though she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Dawn came too quickly. Jessie rose early to prepare food for the posse: biscuits, jerky, and coffee for the trail. Yates found her in the kitchen, packing the provisions into saddlebags. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice gentle. "So should you," she countered, continuing her work. "But I suspect neither of us got much rest last night." "No," he moved beside her, helping to tie the bags. "Jessie, if something happens, don't," she interrupted, unable to bear the thought. "You'll be back by supper time with stories of how you ran those rustlers all the way to Mexico." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "From your mouth to God's ears." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "Still, I want you to have this. It's the deed to the ranch and a letter giving you authority to act in my absence if needed." Jessie stared at the document. "Yates, I can't." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "Cooper's riding with me and there's no one else I trust with this. He hesitated. "If I don't come back, there's a letter from my lawyer in Silver City explaining my wishes. The ranch would be yours." Shock rendered her momentarily speechless. "Why would you do that? You barely know me." "I know enough," Yates replied simply. "I know you've faced hardship and come through it stronger. I know you care for this place almost as much as I do already. And I know I've never met a woman like you, Jessie Harlow." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her softly at first, then with growing intensity as she responded. His hands framed her face with a gentleness that belied their strength, and Jessie allowed herself to lean into him, drawing comfort and something more from his embrace. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "That's not why I'm giving you the deed," Yates said, his voice rough, "but it's another reason I intend to come back." He left her standing in the kitchen, the deed clutched in her hand and the taste of him still on her lips. Through the window, she watched the posse gather, 12 men mounted on their best horses, determination evident even at a distance. Yates took his place at the front beside the marshal, his back straight and proud despite the danger ahead. As they rode away, Jessie pressed her fingers to her lips, holding the memory of his kiss like a talisman against the fear threatening to overwhelm her. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Jessie cleaned the house from top to bottom, baked 3 loaves of bread, and mended every piece of clothing she could find in need of repair. Mrs. Finch kept her company for part of the afternoon, but the older woman's attempts at cheerful conversation only heightened Jessie's anxiety. "They'll be fine," Mrs. Finch assured her. "Yates Lawson is the most level-headed man in these parts. If anyone can bring those boys home safely, it's him." But as sunset approached with no sign of the posse, even Mrs. Finch's confidence wavered. She returned to the cookhouse, promising to bring supper later, leaving Jessie alone with her worry. The sound of approaching horses just after dusk sent Jessie rushing to the porch, hope and dread warring within her. But it wasn't the posse returning, it was a single wagon driven by a man she recognized as the town's doctor, with Harriet Blackwood seated beside him. "Miss Harlow," Dr. Wilson called as he pulled up. "I've come from town. There's been shooting in the canyons. We're setting up at the church to receive wounded." "Have you heard anything?" Jessie asked, descending the steps. "Is anyone hurt?" "We don't know details yet," the doctor replied. "A rider came in saying there was a gunfight, but he didn't wait to see the outcome." Mrs. Blackwood eyed Jessie with barely concealed hostility. "We're collecting bandages and supplies. The Ladies' Aid Society is organizing care for the wounded." Despite her dislike for the woman, Jessie nodded. "I'll gather what we have and come with you." She rushed inside, collecting clean sheets and the ranch's medical supplies. Her hands trembled as she worked, her mind conjuring terrible images of Yates wounded or worse. By the time she returned to the wagon with her arms full, Mrs. Finch had joined them, bringing additional supplies from the cookhouse. "I'll stay here in case they come back to the ranch first," the older woman told Jessie. "You go, Yates would want you there if he's hurt." The ride to town was tense, with Dr. Wilson urging the horses to their fastest pace. Mrs. Blackwood kept glancing at Jessie, her expression calculating. "You seem quite concerned for Mr. Lawson's welfare," she observed. "For a housekeeper," Jessie met her gaze steadily. "I'm concerned for all the men, Mrs. Blackwood. They're risking their lives to protect our community." "Indeed." The woman's tone suggested she didn't believe Jessie's neutral answer. "It's just that one wonders about your attachment to a man you've known such a short time." Before Jessie could respond, Dr. Wilson intervened. "This isn't the time, Harriet. We'll need everyone working together tonight." The church was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Women set up cots while the minister and several men moved pews to create space. Jessie threw herself into the preparations, tearing sheets into bandages and helping to boil water for sterilizing instruments. As night deepened, the first wounded arrived, 2 ranch hands with minor injuries who reported that the posse had tracked the rustlers to a box canyon. A gunfight had erupted, with the outlaws pinned down but fighting back fiercely. Yates and the marshal were leading a group to flush them out from behind, one man said as Dr. Wilson bandaged his arm. "That's when we got sent back with the wounded." "How many rustlers?" someone asked. 7, maybe 8, mean-looking bunch. Jessie continued working, her worry building with each passing hour. More wounded trickled in, but Yates wasn't among them. Neither was Cooper or the marshal. The waiting became unbearable. Just past midnight, the church doors burst open as several men carried in a blood-soaked figure. Jessie's heart stopped until she realized it wasn't Yates. It was one of the rustlers, a bullet in his shoulder and another in his leg. "We got most of them," announced a dust-covered rancher. 3 dead, 4 captured. They won't be troubling this valley again." "And our men?" asked the minister, the rancher's face sobered. Marshall took a bullet to the side, Cooper's bringing him in, and Lawson. Jessie stepped forward, unable to bear the suspense. "What about Yates? Is he alive?" The man looked at her, recognizing her fear. "He's alive, miss, but it's bad. Took a bullet meant for Cooper." The world seemed to tilt beneath Jessie's feet. She gripped a nearby table to steady herself, aware of Mrs. Blackwood's sharp gaze but beyond caring what anyone thought. "Where is he?" she demanded. "They're bringing him. Should be here soon." The next hour was the longest of Jessie's life. She helped Dr. Wilson prepare for more wounded, her movements mechanical while her mind raced with prayers and pleas. When the door finally opened again, revealing Cooper and another man carrying a stretcher, Jessie couldn't stop herself from rushing forward. Yates lay pale and still, his shirt dark with blood. A crude bandage wrapped his upper chest, already soaked through. "Yates," she whispered, touching his face. His skin was clammy, but she felt the faint warmth of breath when she leaned close. "Shot went through his shoulder," Cooper explained, his own face streaked with dirt and tears. "He pushed me out of the way. Damn fool saved my life." They carried Yates to a cot near the doctor's makeshift operating table. Dr. Wilson examined him quickly, his expression grave but determined. "The bullet's out, which is good, but he's lost a lot of blood. I need to clean and stitch the wound properly." He looked at Jessie. "I could use steady hands. Can you assist?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Tell me what to do." For the next hour, Jessie helped as the doctor worked to save Yates's life. She held instruments, applied pressure when bleeding worsened, and wiped away sweat when fever began to take hold. Through it all, she spoke softly to Yates, willing him to fight to survive. "You promised you'd come back," she murmured as Dr. Wilson tied the final stitch. "Don't you dare break that promise, Yates Lawson." By dawn, the crisis had passed. Yates remained unconscious but stable, his breathing more regular. Dr. Wilson finally stepped back, washing blood from his hands. "You should rest," he told Jessie. "You've been up all night." "I'm staying with him," she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. The doctor nodded, understanding in his tired eyes. "Very well, call me if his condition changes." As the early morning light filtered through the church windows, the atmosphere quieted. Most of the wounded had been treated and either taken home or settled on cots for recovery. The marshal was stable but serious, and 3 other men had significant injuries. 2 rustlers had survived to face justice. Jessie sat beside Yates, holding his hand and bathing his forehead when fever made him restless. She was so focused on him that she didn't notice Mrs. Blackwood and several other town women watching her with speculative expressions. "Miss Harlow," Mrs. Blackwood's voice startled her. "A word, if you please." Reluctantly, Jessie followed the woman to a corner of the church. Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Cunningham joined them, along with another woman Jessie didn't recognize. "Your concern for Mr. Lawson goes beyond that of an employee," Mrs. Blackwood stated without preamble. Too exhausted for pretense, Jessie nodded. "Yes." "We've received word from Silver Springs," Mrs. Blackwood continued. "It seems you're known there, or rather, a woman matching your description is. A woman wanted for questioning in connection with an assault and suspected involvement in gambling operations." Cold fear washed through Jessie. "That's not the whole story." "Then perhaps you should enlighten us," Mrs. Blackwood pressed, "before the marshal recovers enough to act on this information." Jessie glanced at Yates's still form. She could run. It was her first instinct, honed by years of self-preservation. But running would mean leaving him, perhaps never knowing if he survived. And if he did survive, he would wake to find her gone without explanation after he'd risked everything to give her a home. "My husband was a gambler," she began, her voice low but steady. "He used me as collateral for a debt. When the men came to collect, I defended myself. That's the assault they're referring to. My husband was killed that same night in a separate incident. I've been running ever since, afraid of being blamed for his criminal associations." The women exchanged glances. "And your relationship with Mr. Lawson?" Mrs. Peterson asked. "He offered me honest work when I had nowhere else to go," Jessie replied. "I didn't intend to." She faltered, unable to find words for the feelings that had grown between them. "He's a good man, better than I deserve." "Yet you deceived him about your past," Mrs. Blackwood pointed out. "No," Jessie corrected. "He knows everything I've just told you. He knew before he rode out yesterday." This clearly surprised the women. Before they could respond, a weak voice called from across the room. "Jessie." She whirled around to see Yates struggling to sit up. Without a backward glance at the town women, Jessie hurried to his side. "Don't move," she admonished gently, pressing him back. "You've been shot." "Cooper?" he asked, his voice raspy. "He's fine, thanks to you. Everyone's calling you a hero." Relief washed across his face, followed quickly by a grimace of pain. "Doesn't feel very heroic." His eyes, though glazed with fever, focused on her face. "You're still here." "Of course I am," she whispered, stroking his hair back from his forehead. "Where else would I be?" He caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Thought you might run when trouble came." "I considered it," she admitted, "but I couldn't leave without knowing you were safe." She leaned closer, pressing her forehead to his. "And I'm tired of running, Yates." His eyes drifted closed, but a faint smile touched his lips. "Good, because I'm in no condition to chase you." Dr. Wilson approached, checking Yates's pulse and temperature. "Fever's holding steady. We need to get him somewhere more comfortable for recovery." "I can take him back to the ranch," Cooper offered, appearing at Jessie's side. "No," Mrs. Blackwood interrupted, stepping forward with the other town women behind her. "Mr. Lawson should stay in town where the doctor can monitor him closely." She looked at Jessie, her expression softer than before. "He can stay at my house. It's the largest in town with a proper guest room. And," she added with a pointed look at her companions, "Miss Harlow is welcome to stay as well to assist with his care." Jessie stared at the woman in surprise. This wasn't forgiveness or even full acceptance, but it was an olive branch of sorts. "Thank you," she said simply. That would be best for him. 2 days later, Yates was installed in the Blackwood home, his condition improving steadily under Dr. Wilson's care and Jessie's constant attention. The fever had broken, and though he remained weak, his natural strength was returning. Jessie had just finished changing his bandages when Sheriff Thomas, who had ridden in from Silver Springs, requested to speak with her. With trepidation, she followed Mrs. Blackwood to the parlor where he waited. "Miss Harlow," the sheriff greeted her, hat in hand. "I understand you were involved in an incident in Denver some years back." "Yes," she admitted, seeing no point in denial. "I was," the sheriff nodded. "I've reviewed the case. The man you injured, a Mr. Davenport, recovered fully. He later admitted to authorities that he and his companion had threatened you under orders from a gambling syndicate to which your husband owed money." Hope flickered in Jessie's chest. Then, "I'm not wanted for assault." "No, madam. Mr. Davenport declined to press charges once the full story came to light, and your husband's debts died with him." The sheriff cleared his throat. "I came to inform you that you're free to go about your life without fear of legal consequences from that incident." Relief made Jessie's knees weak. She sank into a chair, tears threatening. "I've been running for so long," she whispered. "I hardly know what it means to stay in one place." Mrs. Blackwood, who had remained silent during the exchange, stepped forward. "It means building a life, Miss Harlow, something I believe you've already begun here." Her tone softened unexpectedly. "The way you cared for our wounded men, especially Mr. Lawson, speaks to your character more than any past troubles." The sheriff tipped his hat. "I'll be heading back tomorrow. The rustlers we captured will face trial in Silver Springs for murder and theft." After he left, Jessie turned to Mrs. Blackwood. "Thank you for your kindness. I know you had doubts about me." "I still do," the older woman replied frankly, "but Yates Lawson is one of the finest men in this territory. If he sees something in you worth standing by, perhaps the rest of us should look more closely." She smoothed her skirt. "Besides, this town could use more young women of courage and loyalty. Those qualities are rarer than they should be." Upstairs, Jessie found Yates awake and alert, propped up on pillows. His face brightened when she entered. "You look like someone who's heard good news," he observed. Jessie sat beside him on the bed. "The sheriff from Silver Springs says I'm not wanted for anything. The man I injured recovered and didn't press charges once he told the truth about that night." "That is good news," Yates agreed, taking her hand, "though it wouldn't have mattered to me either way." "It matters to me," Jessie said softly. "It means I can stop looking over my shoulder. I can stay in one place without fear." She squeezed his hand. "I can build a future." "And where do you see that future, Jessie Harlow?" She met his gaze steadily. "At the Double L if the offer still stands. As my housekeeper." Yates asked, a teasing light in his eyes despite his weakened state. "No," Jessie replied with newfound courage. "As your wife if you'll have me." The word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Yates pulled her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I've wanted to ask you since the second week you were at the ranch," he admitted, "but I thought it was too soon, that you'd think I was taking advantage. And now, Now I know life's too short and too precious to waste time. With his good arm, he drew her closer. Marry me, Jessie. Not because you need a place to belong, but because you already belong with me. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, word of their engagement spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. Most reactions were positive. Yates's heroism in the Rustler battle had elevated his already high standing, and Jessie's tireless care of the wounded had softened many hearts toward her. Still, some whispers persisted about her mysterious past and the propriety of their arrangement. 3 weeks after the gunfight, Yates was strong enough to return to the Double L, though Dr. Wilson insisted he avoid strenuous work for at least another month. Jessie drove the wagon, with Cooper riding alongside as protection, though the threat of rustlers had diminished with the gang's capture. As they approached the ranch, Yates reached over with his good arm and took Jessie's hand. Almost home, he said, the word carrying new meaning for both of them. The ranch hands had prepared a welcome, with Mrs. Finch cooking a feast and the bunkhouse cleared for an impromptu celebration. That evening, seated at the head of the table with Jessie beside him, Yates announced their engagement officially. About time, Cooper declared, raising his glass. The boss has been mooning over you since you stepped off that stage, Miss Harlow. Laughter and cheers filled the room as the men toasted the couple. Later, as Jessie helped Yates to his room, still insisting on separate quarters, until they were properly married, he paused at his door. I was thinking we could set the date for Christmas, he suggested. That gives me time to heal fully and you time to prepare whatever kind of wedding you want. Christmas would be perfect, Jessie agreed. Though I don't need anything elaborate, just you and perhaps a few friends. Yates smiled, touching her cheek gently. You'll have more friends by then than you realize. This community may be slow to accept newcomers, but once they do, it's for life. 2 months passed in a blur of wedding preparations and ranch work. Yates recovered his strength, though a new scar marked his shoulder as a permanent reminder of his brush with death. Jessie found herself increasingly included in town activities as the women of Redemption Creek gradually accepted her presence. Even Mrs. Blackwood unbent enough to invite Jessie to join the Ladies' Aid Society, though Jessie suspected the invitation was more about keeping an eye on her than true friendship. Still, it was progress. On a crisp December morning, Jessie was hanging garlands in the ranch house when Cooper rode in with a letter from Silver Springs. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened it, old fears dying hard. Inside was a legal document officially clearing her name in connection with the Denver incident, along with a bank draft for a surprising amount. What is it? Yates asked, seeing her shock. Money, Jessie replied, showing him the draft. Apparently William had a life insurance policy. Since his gambling debts were settled with his death, the remainder comes to me as his widow. Yates studied the paper. That's a substantial sum, enough to start fresh anywhere you wanted. Jessie looked around at the home they'd created together, at the Christmas decorations, the comfortable furniture, the photographs now including one of her beside Yates on the porch. I'm exactly where I want to be, she said, tearing the bank draft in half. Yates caught her hands. Jessie, no. That's your money. And I'll use it, she assured him, but not to leave. I thought we might set it aside for our children's education someday, or perhaps to build that new barn you've been talking about. The joy that spread across Yates's face was worth more than any fortune. He pulled her into his arms, heedless of Cooper's presence. Have I told you today that I love you, Jessie Harlow? He murmured against her hair. Soon to be Jessie Lawson, she corrected, leaning into his embrace. And yes, but I never tire of hearing it. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, with a fresh dusting of snow blanketing the valley. The church in town had been decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and every lantern was lit against the early winter darkness. Jessie stood in Mrs. Blackwood's guest room, where she'd spent the night according to tradition. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant cream-colored satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, ordered specially from Denver. You look beautiful, Mrs. Finch declared, adjusting the small wreath of holly berries serving as Jessie's headpiece. Yates won't know what hit him. A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Blackwood, her usual stern expression softened for the occasion. "The church is full," she reported. "It seems everyone in the county has turned out." "I didn't expect so many people to care," Jessie admitted. "You underestimate yourself," Mrs. Blackwood replied, "and you underestimate how much this town values Yates Lawson. His happiness matters to a great many people." She hesitated, then added, "Including me." The woman extended a small box. "I wanted you to have this. It was my mother's." Inside lay a delicate cameo brooch. Jessie looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Blackwood, I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," the older woman interrupted, echoing Yates's words from months ago. "Consider it a peace offering, and perhaps the beginning of a friendship." Tears threatened to ruin Jessie's carefully applied powder. "Thank you," she whispered, pinning the brooch to her dress. Cooper, resplendent in his best suit, arrived to escort her to the church. "Boss is nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs," he reported with a grin. "Asked me 3 times if I was sure you hadn't changed your mind." "Never," Jessie assured him, taking his arm. The church glowed with candlelight as Cooper led her down the aisle. Faces turned to watch her pass, some familiar, some still strangers, but all part of the community that was becoming her own. At the altar stood Yates, tall and handsome in a new black suit, his gray eyes widening as he saw her. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with promises exchanged before God and neighbors. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates pulled Jessie into a kiss that drew cheers and a few good-natured whistles from the congregation. The celebration moved to the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in Redemption Creek. Music from a fiddle and piano filled the air as couples danced and children darted between the adults. Sheriff Thomas approached during a quiet moment, tipping his hat to the newlyweds. "Mrs. Lawson, I have news you might find interesting. The men who were hunting for your late husband's debts. They've been arrested in Kansas City for operating an illegal gambling ring. They won't be troubling anyone for a very long time." "Thank you for telling me," Jessie said, feeling the last weight of her past finally lift. "And thank you for everything you did to help clear my name." As the sheriff moved away, Yates pulled Jessie close. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson?" "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. Across the room, Mrs. Blackwood raised her glass in a subtle toast. Beside her, other town women who had once looked at Jessie with suspicion now smiled in genuine welcome. "I told you they'd come around," Yates murmured, following her gaze. "You were right about many things," Jessie acknowledged, leaning into his strength. "Including the fact that I belonged here all along. I just didn't know it yet." As the evening drew to a close, they prepared to leave for the Double L, where they would begin their married life together. On the church steps, a group of townspeople gathered to see them off. Someone called out a teasing comment about the new bride's mysterious arrival months earlier. Before Jessie could respond, Yates took her hand firmly in his and faced the crowd. "There's nothing mysterious about my wife," he declared, his voice carrying in the winter air. "She's the bravest, most honest woman I've ever known. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me." A hush fell over the gathering until Cooper stepped forward. "No one's suggesting anything, boss. We're just glad she found her way here." He raised his hat. "To Mr. and Mrs. Lawson." The cheer that followed warmed Jessie's heart as Yates helped her into the wagon. As they drove away, she leaned against his shoulder, watching the town lights recede behind them and the stars emerge in the vast prairie sky. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, his arm secure around her. "That sometimes running away leads you exactly where you're meant to be," Jessie replied, "and that I'm done running." "Good," Yates said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "because you've got a lifetime of staying ahead of you." The Double L appeared on the horizon, windows glowing with welcome light. Home, Jessie thought. Not just a place to hide, but somewhere to build, to grow, to love. The kind of belonging she'd searched for all her life without knowing what she sought. As Yates helped her down from the wagon, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, despite his still healing shoulder, Jessie knew with absolute certainty that her days of shame and fear were behind her. Ahead lay a future as vast and promising as the western sky, and beside her stood the man who had seen her worth when others saw only suspicion. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," Yates whispered against her lips as the door closed behind them, and home it was at last. 5 years later, Jessie stood on the porch of the Double L, watching as Yates lifted their 3-year-old daughter onto her first pony. Little Martha, named for Yates's sister, squealed with delight as her father led the gentle creature in a circle around the yard. "Not too fast," Jessie called, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew strong. "She's a natural, just like her mother," Yates called back, pride evident in his voice. Jessie smiled, remembering how Yates had taught her to ride properly during their first year of marriage. She'd taken to it quickly, discovering a freedom in galloping across the open range that helped heal the final wounds of her troubled past. The Double L had prospered under their joint care. The new barn Jessie's inheritance had helped build stood tall behind the main house, and the herd had doubled in size. 3 more hands had been hired to manage the expanding operation, and Cooper had married the schoolteacher, building a small house on the edge of Lawson property. Redemption Creek had grown too, with a railway spur line bringing new settlers and opportunities. Mrs. Blackwood had become an unexpected ally, her initial suspicion of Jessie transforming gradually into a grudging respect and eventually a true friendship. When Martha was born, it was Mrs. Blackwood who arrived first with a handmade quilt and practical advice for the new mother. The sound of an approaching wagon drew Jessie's attention. Sheriff Thomas, now Mayor Thomas, drove up with his wife beside him. "Afternoon, Jessie," he called. "Hope we're not intruding." "Never," she assured him, waving them in. "Yates just started Martha on her riding lessons. She's a brave one," Mrs. Thomas observed as the little girl demanded to go faster. "Takes after both her parents, I'd say." Mayor Thomas nodded in agreement. "We've come with an invitation. The town council wants Yates to consider running for county commissioner in the fall election. With his standing in the community and business sense, he'd be a natural." Jessie wasn't surprised. Yates's reputation had only grown over the years, his fair dealings and willingness to help neighbors cementing his position as a leader in the region. "He'll be flattered," she replied. "Though you'll have to convince him he can do the job and still run the ranch." "That's where you come in," Mrs. Thomas said with a knowing smile. "Everyone knows the Double L runs as much on your good sense as his hard work." The compliment warmed Jessie. There had been a time when she couldn't have imagined being trusted with a household's china, let alone having a voice in community affairs. Yet here she stood, respected rancher's wife, mother, and in her own quiet way, a woman of influence. Later that night, after the visitors had gone and Martha slept soundly in her room, Jessie and Yates sat on the porch swing watching the stars emerge. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, his free hand occasionally stroking her rounded belly. "County commissioner," he mused, considering the mayor's proposal. "Can't say I ever saw myself in politics." "You'd be good at it," Jessie assured him. "People trust you, they know you'll speak your mind and do what's right." Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. "They trust you too, you know." "Mrs. Blackwood tells everyone who'll listen how the Ladies' Aid Society's donations doubled once you took over the accounts." Jessie laughed softly. "Who would have thought Mrs. Blackwood would become my champion? She was ready to run me out of town on a rail when I first arrived." "People change," Yates said simply. "They learn to see beyond first impressions." "Or dramatic entrances on dusty stagecoaches," Jessie added, remembering that fateful day. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been leaving the silver dollar when I arrived?" Yates considered this. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be, Jessie." She nestled closer, contentment washing through her, even when the town tried to shame me. "Especially then," Yates replied, his voice dropping to the tender tone reserved only for her. "Best thing I ever did was take your hand and tell them all you were my wife even before you were." "Your future wife," Jessie corrected with a smile, "though I didn't know it yet." "I did," Yates assured her. "From that very first day." As darkness settled fully over the ranch, bringing with it the chorus of night insects and the distant lowing of cattle, Jessie closed her eyes and gave thanks for the journey that had brought her here, not just to this place, but to this life. A life built on trust and second chances, on seeing beyond appearances to the truth of a person's heart. "I love you, Yates Lawson," she whispered, the words as fresh and true as the first time she'd spoken them. His arms tightened around her, his response a promise kept through 5 years of marriage and countless challenges met together. "And I love you, Jessie Lawson. Yesterday, today, and every tomorrow were given." Above them, stars wheeled in ancient patterns across the vast prairie sky, bearing witness to a love that had begun with a desperate arrival, and a defender's outstretched hand, a love that would continue to grow, season after season, in the home they had built together in the heart of the wild, beautiful West.